I've been walking the same streets for over 50 years, camera slung over my shoulder, fingers stained with developer fluid. My shop smells of dust, cedar shelves, and the faint vinegar tang of old negatives. The bell above the door has a tired little jingle, like it's been laughing with me at the same old jokes for decades. Kids come and go, couples break up, businesses rise and fall, but my photos remain. I've captured first kisses outside the bakery, soldiers hugging their mothers at the bus station, kids licking dripping ice cream cones in July heat. The faces change, the feelings don't. Or at least, that's what I used to think. Lately, the faces I see in town barely look at me. They walk past in perfect hair and curated outfits, their eyes glued to glowing rectangles. Sometimes they film themselves twirling in front of murals I painted with light 20 years ago, unaware the man who made those moments famous is standing right there. 2 weeks ago, it got worse. I was sitting on the bench outside my shop, polishing the brass nameplate that reads Martin Carter, photography since 1972, when a group of teenagers came skipping down Main Street. Not children, but not adults either, somewhere in that loud, self-assured in-between. One boy, tall and thin with hair like a cereal commercial, pointed at my camera. "Whoa, guys, check it out," he called, pulling his phone out like he'd spotted an animal at the zoo. "Vintage. Like, my grandpa had one of those." No, they make digital now, right?" The others laughed. A girl with a denim jacket and too much perfume pretended to crank an imaginary handle on an invisible camera, making exaggerated click noises. I smiled the way I've learned to when people mistake my work for a hobby. "This one's older than you are," I said, brushing a thumb over the worn leather. "Yeah," another boy chimed in, filming me openly, "probably older than my dad, too. Bet it takes, like, an hour to get a picture." Their laughter followed them down the block. I stayed on the bench, pretending to watch the traffic light change, but inside, a little part of me sagged. That night, I walked into my darkroom, the one place the modern world hasn't found a way to rush, and switched on the red bulb. My fingers hovered over a stack of contact sheets, each one a window into someone's forgotten day. And that's when I saw it, a strip of negatives I hadn't thought about in years, curled at the edges like they'd been holding their breath. On the contact sheet, a man in a suit, grinning too wide, stood with his arm around a woman in a dress she probably told her husband she never bought. The year was 1996, the alley behind them still had the old Pepsi mural. They didn't notice me when I clicked the shutter. They were too busy kissing. I flipped through the rest of the set. Different people. Different years. Same kind of secrets. And then I saw them. Not the kids from the street today, but people with the same eyes, same cheekbones. Parents. Grandparents. I ran my finger over one image in particular, a man I knew now as the town's most respected pastor, leaning too close to a woman who wasn't his wife, his hand on her waist. The photo was from 1984. The girl he was whispering to. I'd seen her recently, holding the hand of a young influencer with perfect hair. The bell above the shop door rang in my mind, though I knew I'd locked it hours ago. I could hear those kids laughing again, calling me outdated, irrelevant. My hands tightened on the contact sheets until the paper bowed. Maybe I was outdated. Maybe my work didn't fit in their world anymore. But in my world, the one built frame by frame, truth by truth, I held something they didn't. Something they couldn't filter or edit away. And as I stood there in the red glow, the seed of an idea began to take root. Not fast. Not loud. But steady, the way all good photographs start, in the quiet, before the image comes to life. I wasn't born with a camera in my hands, though sometimes it feels that way. I bought my first one at 17, a battered Pentax K1000 I found at a pawn shop in the next county over. I'd been saving tips from bussing tables at Frankie's Diner, and I walked home with that camera slung across my chest like a promise. I didn't know what I was doing at first. My early rolls were clumsy, crooked horizons, light leaks, focus that wandered like my attention. But every once in a while, I caught something. The way sunlight clung to the dust above the high school gym floor. A girl's face in mid-laugh at the county fair. Moments that, once frozen, felt bigger than they had in real life. By 19, I was apprenticing under Mr. Jacobs, the town's only professional photographer. His shop smelled of chemicals and cedar shavings from the frames he built by hand. He taught me how to measure light with my palm, how to coax a reluctant subject into relaxing without them realizing, how to develop film so gently it never curled. When he retired, he sold me the shop for less than it was worth, muttering something about keeping it in hands that care. I worked every wedding, every school portrait day, every newspaper assignment the Brookfield Chronicle could spare. My world was measured in rolls of film, in the whir of the darkroom fan, in the thrill of an image blooming in a tray of developer. I wasn't just photographing people. I was archiving the town itself. Before the chain stores came in. Before the old cinema closed. Before half the brick buildings downtown became coffee shops with names in lowercase letters. My walls filled with proof sheets, baseball games, street parades, first days of school, last dances. I never threw anything away. People came to trust me. If you needed an obituary photo, you came to me. If your son was leaving for the army, you booked me for family portraits. I worked for cash when folks were short, for pies and quilts when they couldn't pay at all. That's what small towns were: trade, trust, and stories. And I kept all the stories, even the ones I wasn't meant to. See, film doesn't care if the moment is beautiful or ugly. It doesn't care if the groom is holding the bridesmaid's hand a little too long, or if the mayor is slipping out the back door of a bar he swore he never visited. I didn't set out to capture those moments, but sometimes the frame caught more truth than the people in it wanted told. At first, I thought little of it. Just life, complicated and imperfect. But over decades, I began to notice patterns. That couple celebrating their 50th anniversary. I had pictures of each of them with other people, decades earlier, faces close, eyes guilty. That proud business owner who donated to every charity. I'd once caught him slipping cash from the church bake sale. The negatives went into sleeves, labeled with the date and event. Not for blackmail, that's never been my way, but because I keep everything. The past doesn't disappear just because people change their hair or their address. The town changed faster than I did. Digital cameras came, then smartphones. Folks stopped hiring me for birthdays, started taking their own pictures with something they kept in their pocket. My prints gathered dust in the window. I made ends meet restoring old photographs, scanning faded Polaroids for families who wanted them cleaned up for Facebook. I told myself it didn't matter. That art was more than popularity. But when the younger crowd started to mock me openly, filming my shop for aesthetic old man content, calling my work vintage like it was a punchline, something inside me soured. They didn't know that their own histories lived in my back room. That the parents who lectured them about morals had once stumbled out of bars at midnight into my lens. That their polished family Christmas cards hid fractures I'd documented long before they were born. Then came the Brookfield Creators Fair last spring. The town hall was filled with influencers and photographers, or at least people with expensive phones and ring lights. I walked through the aisles, hands in my coat pockets, listening to them talk about building a brand and curating an image. They spoke like they'd invented the idea of preserving memories. One of the kids from that group outside my shop was there, printing his phone shots on glossy paper and selling them for $50 each. He spotted me, grinned, and called out, "Hey, Mr. Carter. Want me to show you how to do real editing?" His friends laughed. I smiled politely and kept walking. But later that night, in the quiet of my shop, I pulled open the filing cabinets in the back room. For tall drawers, each one full of my life's work, organized by year. The air smelled faintly of fixer and paper. I ran my fingers over the labeled envelopes. 1978, Summer Fair. 1984, Town Parade. 1996, Chamber of Commerce Gala. My fingertips stopped on the one from that gala. I remembered the night, the low lighting, the sharp smell of champagne, the sound of someone playing Sinatra badly on the piano. And the people. The ones who now smiled out of framed portraits in their children's homes, pretending their youth had been as clean as they wanted it remembered. The thought that had started as a flicker the week before began to grow roots. I'd been invisible for years, dismissed as a relic. But these faces, these truths, they were still mine. I wasn't sure yet what I would do. But I knew I wouldn't just keep watching the world pretend it had no past. The breaking point didn't come in one grand, cinematic moment. It arrived in pieces, small humiliations stacked like poorly developed prints, until the weight bent something inside me. It was a Saturday in early June, the kind of day when sunlight makes Main Street look like it belongs in a postcard. My shop had been quiet all morning, just the hum of the dehumidifier and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I was dusting the window display, an arrangement of framed portraits from the 70s and 80s, when the sound of high-pitched laughter drifted in from outside. Through the glass, I saw them. The same group from a few weeks earlier, ring light boy, denim jacket girl, a couple of others with perfectly messy hair. They were filming one another in front of the mural on the bakery wall, the mural I'd photographed in every stage of its fading over 40 years. Then denim jacket girl pointed at my shop and said something I couldn't hear. They crossed the street, phones up, filming each other's commentary like it was a sport. The bell over my door gave its half-hearted jingle as they spilled inside, their perfume and cologne cutting through the air like synthetic flowers. Whoa, one of them breathed, sweeping his phone in a slow arc across my framed prints. It's like a museum in here. I set the dusting cloth aside. Afternoon, I said, keeping my voice even. Do these even sell? Ring light boy asked, tapping the glass over a black and white portrait of a young couple in front of the old movie theater. Like, do people still buy pictures when you can just, take your own? Denim jacket girl leaned close to the frame. It's cute, in a retro way, she said to her phone. Like, my grandma would love this. I told myself to ignore it, to let them browse and leave. But then one of the quieter boys pointed at the counter where my old Pentax Saturday, check this out, he said, picking it up without asking. Bet this thing takes, like, a day to get a picture. Imagine walking around with this dinosaur. They laughed. Not the light, careless laughter of people enjoying themselves, but the sharp, knowing kind, meant to slice. Does it even have, like, a screen? Ring light boy smirked, flipping it over. Guess you just, hope it turns out. I reached across the counter and gently took it from him. That camera, I said, has captured more truth than your phone ever will. The words hung there for a moment, awkward and heavy. Then denim jacket girl made a face like she'd smelled something sour. Okay, deep, she muttered, rolling her eyes. They didn't buy anything. They left in a flurry of perfume and laughter, the bell over the door barely keeping up. I thought that would be the end of it. But that evening, as I was locking up, I saw the video they'd made. Someone had tagged the shop's location. The clip showed me behind the counter, my mouth half open mid-sentence, with a caption that read, "Local relic still uses dinosaur cam LOL." It had thousands of views already, hundreds of laughing emojis. My stomach tightened as I scrolled through the comments. Bet he still listens to vinyl too. That store smells like mothballs. Imagine paying for a photo when your phone is better. I shut off my phone, but the damage had already landed. It wasn't just mockery, it was dismissal. Erasure. 2 days later, I was walking past the coffee shop when I heard them again. They were huddled around a laptop, the same faces from my shop, plus a few more. I should have kept walking. But my name stopped me. Martin Carter, ring light boy was saying. Yeah, that's him. My mom says he used to photograph, like, everyone's weddings. Now he just sits in that dusty store all day. Another voice, one I recognized only when I saw her face, chimed in. Oh my God, he took my parents' engagement photos. My mom said they were so bad she hid them. Laughter. That was Anna Dorsey's daughter. I'd shot Anna's wedding in '94, free of charge, after her father's farm went under. She'd cried when I delivered the album. Said she'd never be able to repay me. I stood there on the sidewalk, half hidden by the window frame, listening as they pulled apart my life's work like it was nothing. My ears buzzed with their words. I didn't go inside. Didn't defend myself. Just walked back to the shop, each step slow, deliberate, as if rushing might shatter me completely. In the darkroom, I turned on the red light and pulled open a drawer. My fingers found the envelope marked Dorsey Engagement, 1993. I slid the negatives from their sleeve and held them up to the light. Anna, radiant in a pale dress, eyes shining at a man who was not the husband she ended up with. His hand cupped her cheek. Her smile wasn't the careful one she wore in public, it was the dangerous, unguarded kind. I set that strip aside. Pulled another. And another. Faces I'd seen that afternoon began to reappear, younger and unshielded by years of curated self-image. Fathers with women who weren't their wives. Mothers dancing too close to strangers. Future pillars of the community in moments they'd rather erase. It wasn't blackmail I was thinking of. Not exactly. But something shifted in me, quiet and cold. I'd been invisible to them for years, but the truth in these images was anything but. And if they wanted to treat my life's work like a joke, perhaps it was time they saw exactly what my camera had preserved. The shop was closed, but I didn't go home. I sat behind the counter long after the streetlights blinked on, the bell over the door quiet for hours. Outside, Main Street had emptied into the kind of silence only small towns know, the hush between passing trucks, the soft shuffle of a stray cat, the faint hum of the power lines. Inside, the only light came from the red bulb in the darkroom. It painted everything in a muted glow, the counter, the stacks of frames, the dust that hung in the air like tiny ghosts. I'd spread the contact sheets across the work table. They stretched from one end to the other, a paper timeline of the town's history. Decades compressed into square inches of frozen silver halide. Weddings, parades, quiet moments in kitchens and backyards, all pressed flat and silent. And there I sat, hunched over them like a priest over his altar, my hands resting on the images as if they could give me answers. The envelope marked 1996, Chamber of Commerce Gala lay open in front of me. I stared at a single frame, the pastor's hand at the small of a woman's back, her lips curved into a smile that didn't belong to her husband. I remembered the dim lighting that night, the smell of overpoured champagne, the way people laughed a little too loudly when they thought no one was watching. Next to it was a strip from 1989, Harvest Festival. There, the mayor, back when he still had dark hair, leaning against a hay bale, whispering into the ear of a woman whose eyes darted toward the camera in startled recognition. She'd smiled afterward, but the moment was already sealed. I lifted my gaze to the shelves against the far wall. Row after row of manila envelopes, neatly labeled in my careful hand. Every one of them full of truths. And suddenly, it all felt heavy, not the paper itself, but the years I'd been carrying them. I thought about the kids in the coffee shop, their laughter when they spoke my name like it was an old joke. I thought about Anna Dorsey's daughter, making fun of photos her mother had once cried over in gratitude. I thought about how invisible I had become in a town where I had, for decades, been the one who saw everything. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. When I first picked up a camera, I thought photographs were gifts. Proof that someone had been there, that they'd mattered. I never imagined they could become weapons, or that I'd be the one holding them. My chest tightened. Was I really considering this? To take private moments and put them back into the light, not for art but for, what? Vindication? Revenge? I could almost hear my late wife, Claire, in the back of my mind. Her voice was gentle but certain. "Martin, you can't unring a bell." She used to say it when I'd get too worked up over something petty, when she could see I was about to make a choice I couldn't walk back. I looked over at the framed photo of her on the shelf, taken by me, of course, standing in front of the shop in '78, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. She was smiling at me, the real kind of smile, like she could see the person I wanted to be and believed I could get there. The thought of disappointing her kept me rooted to the chair for a long while. My fingertips rested on the edges of the contact sheets, tracing the images without really seeing them. But then, her voice faded, and all I could hear was the echo of those kids laughing in my doorway. The sound of ring light boys saying, "Dinosaur Cam." The comment online that read, "Bet he smells like mothballs." It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what they thought they could get away with, about how they believed history was only the parts they chose to remember. They'd grown up in a world where you could erase yesterday with a delete button. My world didn't work that way. Still, I stayed there for hours, motionless except to turn over a strip of negatives now and then. The clock above the door ticked past midnight. My back ached from the chair, my eyes burned from the red light. Eventually, I pushed the photos back into their envelopes, one by one, sliding each into its rightful drawer. My movements were careful, almost ritual. I wasn't ready to act, not yet. But I also wasn't ready to forget. I locked the darkroom door and stepped out into the shop. The street outside was empty, the lamplight pooling in circles on the cracked pavement. I stood there for a long moment with my hand on the doorframe, staring out at the quiet, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down like the first seconds before a shutter clicks. I turned off the lights and walked to the back, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. Upstairs, in the small apartment above the shop, I lay on the bed without bothering to undress. The ceiling fan spun slowly, its shadow sweeping the walls in a lazy circle. I didn't sleep. Not really. I just watched the light shift from street lamp orange to the pale gray of dawn, thinking about the past, the future, and the thin strip of film between the two. By morning, I still hadn't decided exactly what I would do. But I knew one thing for certain, I was done being invisible. The morning light poured through the lace curtains above the shop, spilling across the floorboards in pale stripes. I sat at the small table in my kitchen, my coffee cooling beside me, staring at the steam as if it might draw the answer for me. I'd been awake all night. Not pacing, not tearing through drawers in some burst of rage, just sitting still, letting the decision settle in like sediment in a glass of water. For weeks, maybe months, I'd been trying to ignore them, the kids with their phone cameras, the parents who'd forgotten what I'd done for them, the comments that treated my life's work like clutter. But something in me had shifted. This wasn't about defending myself anymore. It was about showing them that history has teeth. I finished the coffee, cold now, and rinsed the cup. My movements were deliberate, unhurried. Anger burns fast and bright. I'd learned a long time ago that the real power comes when you let it cool, when you can see the next move as clearly as the negative in a developer tray. I went down to the shop and unlocked the darkroom. The smell of old paper and fixer greeted me like an old friend. I slid open the drawers of negatives, the ones I'd organized over decades. My fingers found the envelopes I'd set aside the night before. Not many, maybe a dozen. Enough. There was no rush. I laid them out on the workbench, years of dust puffing faintly from their edges. I slipped each strip into the enlarger one at a time, watching as the images swelled onto the paper in shades of black and gray. The room was silent except for the hum of the fan and the slow, steady ticking of the wall clock. Some of the photographs were nearly perfect as they were, the faces clear, the settings unmistakable. Others required a little more coaxing from the shadows. I worked carefully, adjusting the light, bringing the truth into sharper focus. By noon, a dozen prints hung from the drying line. I stood back and looked at them. A respected pastor, laughing too closely with a woman not his wife, his hand on her waist. A councilman, drunk and slumped in the alley behind the old theater. A socialite, now a mother of one of my loudest critics, mid-kiss with a stranger at a gala. A store owner, whose children liked to film themselves mocking my shop, caught pocketing cash at a charity event. Each image was its own quiet confession. Together, they were a reminder: the camera sees what it sees, and it forgets nothing. I took my time framing them, nothing flashy, just clean black frames with white matting. I wanted the work to look like what it was, an exhibition. No captions, no commentary. Just photographs. By late afternoon, I was ready to call in a favor. I picked up the old rotary phone in the back office and dialed Linda Price at the Brookfield Community Center. I'd photographed her wedding in '82, and her daughter's in '05. We'd traded pies and prints over the years. "Martin Carter," she said when she answered. "Well, I'll be. What can I do for you?" "I'd like to reserve the West Gallery space," I told her. She hesitated. "The summer art walk's next month. You'd have to hang your work this week if you want it on the tour." "That'll be fine." "You sure? It's been a while since you did a show." "I'm sure," I said, and for the first time in months, I meant it. She penciled me in without asking what I planned to show. Trust, that was something the years had left me, even if respect had faded. That night, I stayed in the shop long after the sun went down, preparing the rest of the display. I chose a mix of landscapes, portraits, and street shots from across the decades, enough to make the exhibition look balanced, enough to keep the real purpose from revealing itself too early. But in the center of the collection, I left space for the 12 framed truths. They'd hang in a single row, eye level, with no explanation. Anyone from town would recognize the faces. Anyone from outside would just see art. It wasn't about humiliation. Not exactly. It was about putting the past back into the light and letting people decide for themselves what it meant. Before locking up, I stood in the middle of the shop and looked at the frames leaning against the wall, ready to be transported to the gallery. The air felt different now, not heavy, not suffocating like the night before. It was the stillness before a shutter click. I turned off the lights, my hand steady on the switch. The decision was made. The work was ready. And when the doors to that gallery opened, there'd be no taking it back. The West Gallery smelled faintly of fresh paint and polished wood when I arrived 2 days later. Linda met me at the door with a smile and a clipboard. "Space is all yours, Martin," she said, leading me down the hall. "You've still got the touch, I can tell from how you're holding those frames." I didn't tell her what was in them. The room was bright and clean, white walls begging for something to break their perfection. I started with the landscapes, the wheat fields in '85, the old train station before it closed, the view from the church steeple on a summer morning. People would linger here first, thinking it was just another walk through nostalgia. Then the portraits, children on bicycles, couples at their kitchen tables, street musicians at the fall festival. Safe, warm, familiar. And finally, the center wall. 12 black frames, evenly spaced, eye level. No captions. No dates. No names. The pastor's hand on the woman's back. The councilman in the alley. The socialite mid-kiss. The shop owner with stolen cash. They weren't scandalous in the tabloid sense, no violence, no vulgarity, but they carried the weight of truth. Anyone from Brookfield would feel the recognition like a cold draft down the back. I stood back and looked at the arrangement. Balanced. Quiet. Unapologetic. The opening was part of the summer art walk, which meant the gallery doors would stay open late. By 6 o'clock, the street outside was alive with the sound of music, food vendors, and people drifting from one venue to another. I kept to the side of the room, letting Linda greet guests. At first, the crowd moved easily through the space, murmuring over the landscapes, smiling at the portraits. Then they reached the center wall. It happened almost the same way every time. A person would pause, lean in closer to a photograph, their brow tightening. Then their eyes would widen just slightly, and they'd glance around to see who else might be watching them. Sometimes they whispered to the person beside them. Sometimes they moved on quickly, but with stiff shoulders. By 7:30, I'd seen two of the young influencers from my shop. Denim jacket girl and ring light boy. They came in laughing, phones in hand, ready to document another retro experience. They took selfies with the wheat field print, posed dramatically in front of the old train station shot. And then they turned toward the center wall. Denim jacket girl froze halfway to raising her phone. Her gaze locked on one of the frames, the socialite mid-kiss. She didn't move for a full 10 seconds. Ring light boy followed her eyes, frowned, then stepped closer. "Is that?" I heard him start, before lowering his voice. "That's my mom," she whispered, not quietly enough. "Oh my God. That's my mom." They looked around like the walls themselves might be listening. Then they left, not in a rush, but with the careful, measured steps of people trying not to draw more attention. More familiar faces came and went, each one brushing past me without a word. But their glances said enough: confusion, discomfort, a flicker of something they'd never associate with a harmless old photographer. By 9 o'clock, the gallery was thinning out. I walked to the center wall, hands behind my back, and studied the 12 frames again. The truth was there, plain and unvarnished. Linda approached me. Getting quite the reaction, she said, her voice low. I smiled faintly. People see what they want to see. She tilted her head, as if trying to read more into my answer, but didn't press. When I left that night, the summer air was warm against my face. Main Street buzzed with the last of the Art Walk crowd, their conversations mixing with the music drifting from a nearby bar. I walked past small groups of people murmuring to each other, their eyes flicking toward me, then away. I didn't say a word to anyone. I didn't need to. The images were doing the talking. Back at the shop, I set the empty frame boxes in the corner and turned off the lights. In the dark, I could still picture the look on denim jacket girl's face, that slow dawning of recognition, the sudden understanding that the past can walk right up to you, even in a crowded room. No confrontation. No shouting. Just the quiet presence of truth, hanging in plain sight for anyone who cared to look. And it was only the beginning. By the next afternoon, I didn't have to wonder if the exhibition was making waves. It started with the phone ringing in the shop, an unusual enough event these days that I almost let it go to the answering machine. But curiosity got the better of me. "Martin Carter Photography," I said. Silence at first, just the faint hiss of a bad cell signal. Then a woman's voice, tight and brittle, "You had no right." The line went dead before I could reply. Half an hour later, another call, this time from the community center. Linda sounded flustered. "Martin, I just had a visit from Pastor Hollis. Well, let's say he's not pleased with one of your photographs." "I imagine not," I said, and thanked her for letting me know. By mid-afternoon, the local Facebook group was humming. Someone had posted a blurry shot of the center wall, zoomed in on the councilman's alley scene. The comments were a mess, half the people insisting it was an invasion of privacy, the other half saying it was art and if you don't want something remembered, don't do it in public. That night, a knock rattled my shop door long after closing. I opened it to find a man in a tailored suit, red in the face, a woman behind him with her arms crossed. "You think this is funny?" he demanded. "I think it's history," I said evenly. "That picture is 30 years old," the woman snapped. I shrugged. "So am I." They left with threats about lawyers, but I noticed neither of them denied the photo was real. Over the next week, the ripples spread. The mayor canceled his speech at the summer fair. The pastor's sermons took on a strange, defensive tone. One of the shop owner's kids, the boy who'd once filmed himself mocking my camera, stopped posting on social media entirely. I didn't have to push any of it. The photographs were doing the work for me. A few people came quietly into the shop. Some wanted to buy prints of the safe images, the landscapes, the family-friendly portraits. Others came for different reasons. One afternoon, a woman in her 50s stood in my doorway, hesitating. When she stepped inside, I recognized her from the 1989 Harvest Festival photo, the one whispering with the mayor. "I saw what you put up," she said softly. "It's not flattering. But it's not untrue." She looked around the shop, her gaze lingering on the stacks of old negatives. "You still have everything, don't you?" "I do." She nodded slowly. "Good." Then she turned and left without another word. The younger crowd avoided me now. No more snide comments on the street, no more laughing as they passed the shop. Some crossed to the other side entirely. The ones who didn't look straight ahead, as if eye contact might bring something to the surface they'd rather keep buried. One evening, as I was locking up, I caught sight of denim jacket girl across the street. She was walking with her mother, the socialite from the gala photo. Their steps were quick, their conversation sharp, the girl gesturing toward me with a furious tilt of her head. The mother glanced over once, her face tight, before ushering her daughter along. The irony wasn't lost on me, for years I'd been invisible to them. Now, suddenly, they couldn't stop seeing me. I didn't seek out their reactions. I didn't defend myself in the Facebook threads or the whispered conversations at the diner. My work had always spoken for itself, and this was no different. By the end of the month, the gallery had to replace the guest book twice. Some entries were polite, others scathing. My favorite was a single line in careful script: "The truth doesn't expire." When the exhibition closed, I packed up the frames and stored them in the back room. The negatives went back into their sleeves, filed away in their proper places. But the shift in town lingered. People remembered now, not just the photographs, but the fact that I'd been there all along, watching, documenting. That I'd seen them at their best and their worst. And that I could, at any time, decide which to show. It was early evening when the bell over the shop door gave its tired jingle. I looked up from the counter to see Pastor Hollis stepping inside, closing the door with exaggerated care. He was alone, no polite smile, no practiced warmth. The last time I'd photographed him was a christening, years ago. He'd shaken my hand afterward and said my work was a blessing to the community. Now his eyes held none of that. "Martin," he began, voice low but taut, "we need to talk." I motioned toward the two chairs near the front window. He didn't sit. "That photograph," he said. "You know the one." "I know all of them," I replied. He shifted his weight, glancing toward the shelves of framed prints. "You've caused unnecessary pain. To people who've done you no harm." I folded my hands on the counter. I showed a moment exactly as it happened. Nothing more. That moment was decades ago. People change. Photographs don't. He took a step closer, his voice tightening. "Do you realize the damage you've done to my family? My congregation?" I met his gaze. "Do you realize the ease with which you dismissed me, year after year, as though I'd disappeared?" For a second, he seemed caught off balance. "This isn't about you." I tilted my head. "Everything we choose to remember, or forget, is about us." Silence stretched between us. The street outside was quiet, just the hum of the street lamp filtering through the glass. Finally, he straightened his shoulders. "I came here to ask you to take it down. Out of respect." "I respect the truth," I said evenly. "I've always respected it." His jaw tightened. "If you think this makes you powerful." "I don't," I interrupted, my voice calm but final. "Power fades. Photographs last." He stared at me for a long moment, as if searching for some sign of hesitation. When he found none, he gave a small, humorless laugh and turned for the door. At the threshold, he paused. "You've made enemies, Martin. Only with people who know exactly what they saw, I said. He left without another word, the bell giving a sharp jingle as the door closed behind him. I stood there a moment longer, letting the quiet settle back into the room. Then I turned the sign to closed and locked the door. Later that week, the councilman came. Then the shop owner's wife. Each conversation followed the same rhythm: indignation, bargaining, warnings. I gave them all the same answer: the photographs stay. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself beyond those few steady lines. It wasn't about vengeance anymore, not exactly. It was about drawing a line in the dust and keeping it there, no matter how many people tried to scuff it away. When the last of them left, the shop felt lighter. The shelves were still lined with decades of moments, both cherished and regretted. And for the first time in years, I felt no urgency to prove my worth. I had, in my own quiet way, already done it. The gallery show ended quietly. No closing speech, no fanfare. Just me and Linda packing the frames into boxes, the walls returning to blank white as if nothing had hung there at all. Back at the shop, I slid each print back into its archival sleeve, labeling them with care. They joined the rest of my life's work in the filing cabinets, not hidden, not erased, just resting. The phone calls stopped within a week. The Facebook threads died out. People still glanced at me differently on the street, but now it was more complicated than contempt. There was caution in their eyes, and something else too, a reluctant recognition that I had never truly been gone. On Sundays, I took my camera and walked the edges of town again. Not for an assignment, not for proof, but for myself. The old brick factory was being torn down. I caught the light slanting through the broken windows one last time. Kids played soccer in the park, their laughter sharp in the autumn air. An elderly couple held hands on a bench, faces tilted toward the sun. I found I was seeing differently now, less as a keeper of secrets, more as a witness to what remained. One afternoon, a boy of about 12 wandered into the shop. He had a cheap film camera in his hands, the kind you find in thrift stores. He turned it over like it was something precious. "Do you develop these?" he asked, holding it out to me. I took it gently. "I do." He grinned, shy but proud. "My grandpa gave it to me. Said if I want to learn how to take real pictures, I should come see you." I felt something loosen in my chest. "Your grandpa have a name?" "Dan Miller," he said. I remembered Dan, his wedding in '83, the fishing trip I'd photographed for the local paper. A good man. "All right," I said, motioning to the counter. "Let's get your first roll started." As I showed the boy how to wind the film, I realized the air in the shop felt different. The weight I'd carried, of being ignored, of being dismissed, had shifted. I hadn't erased the years of mockery or neglect, but I had reminded the town, and myself, of what I was capable of. The boy left an hour later with a fresh roll of film and his camera and a promise to come back when it was done. That night, I sat upstairs in my kitchen, coffee in hand, looking out the window at Main Street. The same street I'd walked 1,000 times, now softer in the evening light. The truth was still in my drawers, in my envelopes, but I didn't need to hang it on a wall again. I knew it was there, and so did they. And for the first time in years, that was enough. Some people think a photograph is just a way to remember. But I've learned it's also a way to remind. Remind a town that the past doesn't fade just because the colors do. Remind the loudest voices that silence doesn't mean absence. Remind myself that I was never just an old man in a dusty shop. I still walk these streets with my camera, same as I always have. Most days, no one notices. Some days, they look away. But every so often, someone meets my eye, and in that flicker of recognition, I can see it. They remember. And I smile, because I know what they know. Film doesn't just capture light. It captures truth. And truth never goes out of focus.